dominant narrative is still that migration is a failure of adaptation, or migration is something that we just need to prevent, rather than seeing it as an engine of innovation and a way to adapt to climate change.
In this whole region now, the decentralization happening, the core element of it is voices, listening to different voices. And this is where making the migrants visible, hearing their voices becomes so important. Hi, I'm Amina, working at ICIMOD.
And I'm Neil, Adger, and I'm from the UK, working at the University of Exeter, and I'm so pleased to be working with Amina, ICIMOD and others.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure getting into this field trip together with you. I don't know, did you ever think that you would be coming to these high mountains one day for work purpose?
I have worked in South Asia for a long time. I've never been this high. To see where the water comes from, to see the cultures, the environment here is fantastic. And we've learned so much in the last few days just about the consequences of climate change, but also how society's changing here in Mustang and the Mustang region. I mean, you've been working here for a long time. What do you see the changes, or how do you see people coping with the consequences of climate change?
You know that I'm passionate about mountains. I was born and brought up here in mountains, not here in Kagbeni. But Kagbeni is especially important because, as we have spoken, in 2023 there was a devastating flood. It's not like mountains, we are not used to floods, we are used to, but then the frequency and intensity, that is what is rapidly changing, and that worries us. Because in 2023 floods, luckily there was no loss of life, but lots of property losses.
Yes.
And people are still struggling to, cope with it. And what we are now seeing is even in this place, like these places are more used to snow, but now more of these precipitation patterns are changing. You have more rains than snow, and the snowfall seasons are shifting, and this is what causes a lot of problem for the people. Mountain people, I mean, we are used to multi-local livelihoods. We are used to moving because that's the way for prosperity. You have seen this landscape. To live off this landscape is very, very difficult. So for wildlife accumulation, we have been moving, and that's what Mustang people have been doing.
I mean, the changes that they've seen over their times, the rainfall patterns, the snowfall patterns, and now these, really flash floods that are coming in the rivers and the rest of it. But of course, this is happening at a time of global change. People from here, they have part of their households, their family members are living abroad, they're sending money back in remittances, they're working, moving seasonally for livelihoods. Their education is, down in the lower parts of Nepal. So you've been working in this area for a long time. What do you think the big societal changes have been in terms of these coping with this climate change, but on top of that, just the sort of changing nature of migration, the changing nature of economies in these places?
So until 1970s, 75, we were a closed, really a closed small mountain country. But now with that economic changes, globalization, what now people have to deal with is that monetary economy. It's not a subsistence, and that shift from subsistence livelihood to a more money-based livelihood, that's the biggest change that you see.
Yeah.
And that brings a host of opportunities, but also a host of challenges. If you look into the mountain agriculture has been neglected for decades. There has not been investment. Most of the investment happened in rice, wheat, maize. These are not essentially mountain crops. And this is where people have to earn money, because that's required in this economy. But then the ways of earning money is limited. Kagbeni has now, of course, tourism is there. So that's one. So the shift that we see in not only here in Mustang, but across the Hindu Kush Himalayan region is from subsistence farm-based livelihoods to other sources of livelihoods. And this is where the challenge lies. Often people have used migration, be it internally in the cities or internationally, as a way of diversifying that livelihood, because that's the only way to cope with climate change, but also global forces
Yeah.
of changes.
Well, we've also been working together for a couple of years. We're working in Bhutan, we're working in India, we're working in Bangladesh together. And of course, these issues are interrelated. I take from here, I mean, there is this narrative about depopulation that places that seemingly have a marginal economy are automatically and inevitably going to depopulate. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the economies in these places, the way that people cope, the social relations, the social norms just change. And I think migration is really, central to that. And we are becoming a much more translocal, a sort of spread, distributed economy. And I think you're seeing that here. And I think we're seeing that even in the lowlands of, that we're working in Bangladesh. We're seeing that in other sorts of places. I mean, the predictions in Bangladesh, for example, right where these rivers flow all the way to the sea, is that because of the starvation of sediments, because of changing flows in the glaciers, all of the glaciers all the way down through the river flows, and because of then rising sea levels associated with glacier and ice loss, that actually the southern part of Bangladesh is just going to depopulate. It's going to be uninhabitable, and the same sort of predictions as you get here, in effect, that rural areas and rural economies are going to be, sort of majorly challenged by climate change. But I think we're seeing a real resilience in these economies, real resilience in the way that people cope with it. And I think migration and mobility is actually one of the central strategies to that. And I think we've both documented that in completely different environments over the last 5 years, and it's really important to get that across, and that there isn't this simple deterministic idea that places are going to be habitable and then they're going to be uninhabitable. And I don't think we're seeing that at all in both of our research.
No, but because this is what is interesting. Depopulation would happen if we stick in this narrative of migration as bad, that everybody needs to stay where they stay, but then don't do the intervention. Because what we are also seeing, and in our own study, also ICIMOD, we have done 2 assessments. We have left the burden of adaptation to communities, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And there is this disconnect between what communities are saying, this is our way to adapt, given our resources. If 80% of the burden of adaptation is with the communities, and they are saying, the households are saying, this is our way, and the government is not getting into that narrative. Because the government, be it national government or international support, that is around 20%, not more than that. This is something that we are seeing time and again, right? If this continues, then I fear that depopulation might happen at one point, because if you're leaving the entire responsibility of adapting to changes to the population, who have very little contribution in this whole mess of anthropogenic climate change, that is then probably in not near future, in distant future.
Yeah.
But if you want to avoid that, then the best way forward is to actually help the people in the strategy that they have chosen the best that you can.
Yeah.
Because people know what is still feasible.
Yeah.
And if I really think that the nuanced understanding of the locations is more with the people than with anything. For instance, I was just talking to somebody from Kagbini. They said, we are worried about floods in July. Just across this, there is Tiri. And they said that, for us, flooding season is June. How do you capture this kind of information from satellite remote sensing or even our kind of studies, like social scientists, even we have limitation. I think this is where this fear of depopulation, people moving, is actually wrong, and that's a very wrong narrative. Rather than that, helping people in their ways, giving that agency, decision making to the communities to the best of the way how they can adapt, and have the intervention to support them becomes so important. But
I think there's 2 things important about community that we as researchers really need to understand, and maybe this is part of our challenge in the next year or 2. One, about how communities make decisions themselves, about the role of collective action, you can call it that, the role of local councils, standard ways of making decisions that make sure they're inclusive. And secondly, I mean, migration remains popular. It remains popular everywhere, but it doesn't work for everyone.
No.
And those decisions are made within households, within families, and of course it's men migrating, women migrating, the whole household migrating, and so the impact of migration on family life, on community life, and even on how communities are able to work for themselves. So we're seeing here, across your study site in Mustang, we're seeing both people moving away, but also people moving in. So we have this idea of this is a net migration origin area that only people move out, but of course people move in. Of course, we've been working on trying to recognize that and looking at in-migration into these sorts of areas. And at least in these areas, that doesn't seem too precarious, that in-migration, at least as I've understood it, because the jobs are there, the security's there, and also people are respected as citizens. They're not exploited, they're paid salaries, I think. So I think the way that the economy and the way that local communities and governance actually treats migrants is incredibly important, and of course we see that absolutely around the world.
Absolutely. I think this is where our study site here is almost a model case.
Yeah.
Where how that migrants who are mostly absent, invisible, if they are made visible, it can actually lead to a thriving economy.
Yeah.
Like mountains, in other cases, people are talking about people moving out, lands being abandoned, depopulation fears. But here, that's not the case. People have said that, okay, we are going out because we have this opportunity. We feel that it's the best use of our resources. Yeah. But then you can see all the lands are being cultivated. Livestock is really doing great. And this is what allows others to come in.
Yes.
But then if you give that dignity, respect to that, the work that people are doing, which we see here, then you have a vibrant economy. You don't have a dying rural economy. And this is, I think, so incredibly important for other places and also for the national governments to really learn from, rather than just blaming that because of migration this is happening. No, sir, this is not happening because of migration, because of these economic forces. And this is where, you need to have more people, make it more open for people to see, okay, in these parts it's better, let people come in here. So every location has certain niche.
Yeah.
And this is what we call in mountain specificities, niche. Every place has something niche. If you can capture it, it doesn't lead to depopulation. It doesn't need to, moving is such a difficult task. Leaving everything you have and making a new place home is not easy. And this is something I think every one of us, we understand, but more policymakers and other stakeholders needs to understand.
This is my first time to Mustang. I have to say I've really enjoyed the food, and all the food is local. And looking at the intensity of the apple production, the intercropping among that, and we were hearing from people that actually the shortages of labour, of course, because some people are away, but migrants who are coming in to look after these farms and do this intense work, even themselves are able to accumulate savings.
Exactly.
And now their children are going down to the lowlands, to Pokhara and the cities to be educated. So I think this is there is a lot of resilience in these sorts of places, and that migration actually builds that resilience.
Exactly. Yesterday we were in Thakurjung. So we were going to a place, the owner was there, he has built a new house. Of course, a lot of remittances from family members who are abroad used to make this new house. And in the old house now, he has given that for renting for a lady from Dolpa, a neighboring village. And she's saying that for us, it's 4 days walk and you have to pass 2 high passes. And she was saying that in our place, we get only 1 crop, right? And with the seasonal shifts in snowfall, lots of avalanche, flash floods. So she was saying that life is very difficult. Now the schools are not there anymore, so the children's education. And they found this, Mustang, as the place that they could actually see for their own development aspiration. And she was very happy. So when we were talking, she said that, no, it's better here. We get a good place to stay. Our children are going to school here. And in that sense, the local communities as well as the local government has been very proactive, supporting. So the local government is even supporting the skilling of migrant workers, migrants, in apple, that pruning, training and all, because they are the ones doing it. It doesn't make sense training the owners who are not even going to be there. And this is really working. The apple farms, it has massively increased.
Yeah.
And what is again another thing very interesting about the Mustang is that social capital. They really have that. So collectively they are now expanding Apple, as a village. They are saying, okay, let's do it here. And that is something again very important lesson for others to learn from.
Yeah. We are painting a very positive picture of Mustang. We're enjoying ourselves. People are so resilient, welcoming, and they are, dealing with these challenges. But of course, let's face it, Amina, climate change is a huge issue here, and also a huge issue where people are moving to. Both of us, in parallel, have been working in places where migrants move to. In cities, principally, people move for education, they move for livelihoods, but even cities themselves are the crucible of where climate change impacts are really occurring. This is the same in Kathmandu, this is the same in Pokhara, in the places that you're also working, isn't it?
Pokhara to a limited extent, but definitely in Kathmandu. And this is what is disheartening, because once you go to Kathmandu, then the entire migrants become invisible. And not only here in Bhutan, we have heard this story. The native population is 4,000, but the actual population is at least 10 times higher. So how do you do that? And again, something that we have heard across these countries, even in India and Bangladesh for that matter, the local governments are particularly talking about, we don't even know how many people are there. So because these are not even counted. And what often said, if it is not counted, then they don't exist. So that invisibility is what makes the entire thing very fragile. The precarity is increased. And this we are again getting time and again. And this, I think, we aim to, how do you make them visible? Because that would be the first step to address their needs.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key lessons that we have from working in the cities way down in the plains, that when people come there, they are, certainly for low-income migrants into cities, they are faced with all sorts of challenges and elements of precarity, from labour exploitation to not having access to schools to all sorts of issues. But climate changes even in the cities, flood risk, landslide risk in cities, because they tend to live in the most precarious, informal, high-density settlements. I think there isn't a simple solution to, migration will take care of climate change. People will move away from places that are more risky to places that are less risky. I think people are moving into places that have their own risks, and that climate change is really exacerbating those because of heat stress in cities, because of all sorts of areas. So I think there isn't a single migration story here to there. People move everywhere, but also there isn't a simple solution to this. We're trying to come up with some principles, let's say, of how do we take on board this idea of migration, invisible populations, people moving, invisible because they're not there, or invisible because they're there and they're not part of the community yet. So I think this is a huge issue for adaptation to climate change, and we're doing what we can really to make these issues visible. But we're still struggling, Amina, I have to say, to come up with the best interventions or what to do about it. What can we say to government? You work a lot with the governments across the region. What do you say to them?
Difficult question to ask ourselves.
Well,
and I know
ourselves, it's a challenge to us.
Yeah, this is something we have been discussing. What is the best way? But this is where I think we have to learn from places where even smaller interventions are being done, be it with government or in Mustang's case with community. The visibility is the first step, because unless it is visible, it's very difficult. The second steps are also to consider that once you understand the migrants, then start to understand what are their needs, what are the ways that would make their migration outcomes positive. Because their migration outcomes positive means the families staying behind, or the communities that they live, their outcomes are positive. Now again, I'm bringing back Kagbeni. The kind of support that they have received from their diaspora, both internal as well international, it's massive. It's much more than the government has been able to do it. And not only in terms of money, but also in terms of in-kind contribution. Like people from neighboring villages literally came here to, remove those debris. So how do you make these connections? I think this rural-urban, the divide that we have created, that needs to go. And if you could bring these origin destinations together, see where those needs are, how could governments at either end, how can they work together?
Yes.
I think that is going to be needed.
Yeah.
How we are going to do it, we'll figure out in 1.5 years' time.
No, well, we know already. We know the principles. I think we know the principles, Amina. We know that we need to reduce the precarity of populations. We know that we need to build their adaptive capacity, and we know that we need to look beyond the material well-being of people, how they feel about their lives, how they feel about people being away, their risk, their aspirations for their future. So it is about a rounded view of well-being, I think. And so I think between us and with our whole team, we've worked this out.
Yes.
But getting those types of principles and realizing those are particularly relevant, particularly the idea of precarity for invisible populations. This idea of precarity has come from the precarity of labour, of how people are exploited for their work. But this idea of precarity in the context of climate change and migration, I think is really important.
I think those principles, now we have a much more clearer understanding. Also, how do you integrate that principles in the existing, interventions, be it local development plannings or the adaptation? Because at the moment, adaptation programs are mostly for in situ adaptation, right? They have not thought about this trans-local livelihoods and the extended social networks and all. So I think the next challenge is, once we have these principles, how do you now really implement it? How do you start? How the governments in origin start to really understand the needs of the migrant workers, so that you can reduce their precarity? I think those practical steps, then that would be the second step to move ahead, and something that we are now presently working on.
I think we should, and I think we're going to be presenting sort of best practice in these areas. There's a huge diversity of challenges. I mean, one of the big interventions in lowland India and in lowland Bangladesh is actually where people are made homeless because of erosion in the rivers, or because of erosion at the coast. These are, I guess, externally what people would regard as climate migrants, but there are very well established policies to actually provide land, provide houses for these, and we've been looking at these in our joint work, this idea of planned relocation, but we find the practice doesn't really take on board these ideas of precarity and well-being. It just sort of says what we really need is houses. What we need is to give people houses, but those houses might be in the wrong place for people's present social networks. They may not be culturally appropriate in terms of the role of women and where their cooking spaces and hygiene and these sorts of things. So I think we can learn a lot and really promote best practice. But I think governments are also, as we have seen it, sort of influenced by this slight aversion to migration. So I think the dominant narrative is still that migration is a failure of adaptation, or migration is something that we just need to prevent, rather than seeing it as an engine of innovation and a way to adapt to climate change. So I think that's also a big challenge for us, these dominant narratives.
Absolutely. And this is the major bottleneck. But having said that, in this whole region now, the decentralization happening, the core element of it is, voices, listening to different voices. And this is where making the migrants visible, hearing their voices becomes so important. Now you mentioned about planned relocation. Again, Mustang has this very famous relocations, but not essential. I wouldn't term that as planned relocation as defined elsewhere. And important lessons to be learned, and something that we have learned in our own work as well. You need to listen to people, give that agency, because that would essentially make sure that the government's interventions are actually a success. So why not listen? If that's going to make the investments, efforts made a success, why don't do it? Because it's not only about having a house, it's about having a livelihood. For young people, it's that livelihood that they're really seeking into, right? So just having a place to live is not going to be sufficient. And listening to people then really helps, for instance, finding a suitable solution that you don't take from one risk to another, but in a resilient place, but also don't take people from one context with one skill sets for livelihoods to a completely new set where they have to now find new skill sets, because that would then make the entire process a failure. I think these are some very important learnings that we have that would help the respective governments to make those interventions actually a success. So completely agree with that.
Yeah, I think we also have a job to do to educate the rest of the world,
Yeah.
not just about this region or the whole of South Asia, but also this sort of discourse about migration as a failure of adaptation, or even more removed from the truth, the fact that there is just going to be mass migration or mass depopulation from one world region to another as a result of climate change. We know because we've researched this,
Exactly.
but how are we going to get that message across? I mean, telling the stories, I think, of the real lives, to connect with people, to generate some empathy between peoples, and realize that these decisions are what we make in every family all around the world, of where to live and how to deal with what we see as our opportunities and the risks around us.
You use the term empathy. I think that's very critical, and also fear, because this whole narrative that you are having this exodus of people from one place and going to mostly global north, that has never happened. That's not going to happen because these mobilities are not that easy, and so I think that reducing that fear is going to be very important as well. That it's not going to happen in near future, because most people, what we need to, again, something that we need to communicate further is moving from one place to another is not an easy task for anybody else.
Absolutely.
I mean, we for work purpose, we move as well. And you have done that within
Yes.
UK. I have done that. That's something I absolutely dislike about it. You take everything else, again, set another home. You need to make your own circle of friends. That's not easy. Sometimes I feel like at the moment I'm actually in this lazy phase where I don't want to move because I'm so comfortable where I'm. And this is the case for others as well. So this fear of people, going, that's not true. It's out of necessity when people move. And you don't need to fear people that you don't know, because at the end of the day, they are also people coming just to make a living for themselves and their families, and making them visible. I think at the heart of it is that invisibility, because since you don't see them, you don't know them, that's when you start to fear of that unknown. The moment the migrant population becomes visible, the kind of services or the kind of inputs that they are bringing to the economy, then right? That reduces that fear and also build that empathy. What do you think?
How people perceive it is not even necessarily the world, their world they experience, but also what they read in the media and what they're exposed to, and just ideas in society. So I think we've got a big job there to inform the opinion formers in this. And I also think we've got a big job to do, Amina, with the scientific community. And I think the only way to do that is to demonstrate the rigor of our social science that we're doing, principally social science, how we interact with the physical risks and associated with, and even the social ecological change that goes on associated with this. So it's a real call for multidisciplinary science, a real call to communicate that clearly, and also to demonstrate how we know that the rigor of our social science through multiple methods. We're doing surveys, we're doing ethnography in this project, we're doing visual methods where people are expressing to us their lived experience of these risks.
And then the consultations, multi-stakeholder consultations.
Governance, policy analysis, working with governments, co-creating this knowledge. It's been a privilege being part of this and being part of the South Asian community working on it. And I really hope that we can bring this to the rest of the world, to the scientific community, and just even if we shift that narrative a little bit, I think we'll have done our job.
And Neil, it's, in this project, what I find fascinating is this partnership between the Exeter, University of Exeter, East Anglia, and us, IHS, ICIMOD, Ramru and others in this global North-South partnership. I think very few projects actually do that, and this is where this gives us that platform to take this knowledge, not only, we have this in the region, but take it globally. I think this is where the scientific community in general is lacking. We do it, we are the ones converted, we don't need to convert ourselves, but then how do you message, not in a technical term that you and I speak, but in a term that others understand. And this is where I think in our team we have also, when you're talking about multidisciplinary, people that work with media and communication with general public, right? I think this is going to be a huge help to shift that needle, even by a few centimeters, that's okay, but still a shift. And also looking into the global platform, global north.
Yeah.
And this is where I think I'm really happy to have this partnership.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been, of course, needs to be facilitated by long-term funding that puts the people that we're working with, front and center and generate that global evidence. We do not want to see moving away from the generation of knowledge in this, because I think knowledge allows us to make this transition to adapt to climate change. It's inevitable, we've got to do it, but we've got to do it in a fair and equitable way. And I think that fair and equitable way rests on rigorous knowledge. We would say that as scientists in this area, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
But of course, scientists, we're just faced with this challenge of climate change. And like all people working in this area, some days wake up optimistic and some days less so. But of course, as climate scientists, we're always asked to be alarmist and pessimistic and how terrible climate change is going to be. So how do you feel about the future of this region in the context of climate change? Do you feel optimistic about how we're going to adapt to climate change?
See, to be honest, I do worry. I do have a son who is 17 years old, and this 2100, 2050, all this, glacier retreat, that does worry me. But am I absolutely pessimistic? No. When I go to the mountains, look at people, the resilience, I don't think that there is need for that pessimism. Yes, more needs to be done to reduce the emissions. That would really help. More needs to be done to do adaptation, but people are doing it.
Absolutely.
So if there is this convergence between what people are doing and the governments and like us, the academia supporting, I don't think that we have to really think of this doomsday. I think we are still in a good place. So yes, definitely worried. Pessimistic? No. I'm still optimistic that things can work out.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think the price of progress is eternal vigilance. I mean, I think we have to do this on a daily basis with all our interactions. I too teach young students, and even our own family. If we think about it, the future 2050 that the climate projections are made to is not very far away.
No, 25
2100
years.
is not that far away. But how the path to those is absolutely in our hands and in the hands of the future generation. So I think this generation of knowledge, we're in a privileged position to do that, and I think we're going to find that societies are going to be able to adapt to climate change, but not without urgent action, and not without not without decarbonising the economy and shifting the economic power and power back to people's to allow them to sort of live a dignified life.
This is where a little bit of worry about the way the global politics is changing, because you can adapt only to a certain extent. If we keep the emissions level, then at one point we also know, and we have to be practical enough to say that we will hit adaptation limits. That's worrying, but I'm still hopeful that the urgent actions would still be done, and because there is no other option. What option do we have, other than to act now? And this is where I think a balance of pessimism, but also a lot of optimism that things could work out. And today is a very optimistic day for me, at least, Neil.
Me too. Let's go and meet some people and go for a walk in this landscape.
Superb. Let's
Thank
do
you.
that.